Welcome to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. Tonight we've got 4 members, 4 questions, and 4 answers for each question. Questions are generated by each squad member and run from the silly to the serious. We're missing Eric tonight, who's off doing some family thing. And then Elliot's trying to help a family member who has come down with COVID. So he had to bow out at the last minute too. So we have a group. Let's go ahead and do a roll call.
Hey everyone, Jenn Cook, Associate Professor, New England College.
Hey everyone, Gina Martin, Assistant Professor, University of Wisconsin-Whitewater.
Hi, I'm Steph Martyr. I am a doctoral candidate at Kent State University, practicing clinical counselor and co-host of Grad School Deconstructed.
My question tonight comes to you all because I was having a conversation with my students this week about the topics of burnout, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue, and they got really deep with it. And I think that they really started to challenge my own notions around these concepts. And so I wanted to ask you all, how do you teach students, clients about these things, burnout, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue? How to notice that folks are experiencing it, how to combat it, how to address it with other colleagues who might be experiencing it and not really have a grasp of it. And sort of as a follow-up, has your approach changed at all due to living in the COVID context?
So I think that this is an interesting question because I think it's different for everyone. And I think that that's the conversation and the discussion that we have when I'm trying to teach students about it, is really looking at it from a sense of, recognizing those signs and symptoms within yourself, identifying what types of things drain you of your energy and what types of things give you energy. And I can't define that for them. And I think that that's really challenging. And that's something that, beginning clinicians and beginning students really want me to define for them. And I can't. It's a personal decision, and it's something that is unique to everyone. So I share some personal stories. I share a little bit about context. I share a little bit about things that I've done. And then I encourage them all to self-reflect on that and to think about what it means for them and what types of things they've noticed in their own lives. And then in terms of COVID, I think that really has increased. And I think that the general population's awareness around things like burnout and especially like FaceTime and Zoom and all of these like electronic things, people start to recognize burnout a little bit more quickly than they may have in the past. And so I think that adds a layer as well. And that's something else that we add to the conversation. But I really think it's a personal thing that has to be defined by each individual.
Well, let me ask a quick follow-up then, because I think that a little bit, I don't deny that people are getting COVID fatigued and burned out with being online all the time. And I wonder if we're misusing that definition when we talk about burnout, sort of like when people clean their house a lot and say that they're so OCD, which makes me crazy. So I wonder if you think that might be confusing the matter and the way that we use that term colloquially now.
I do. And I think that, I don't know, I think both. So I'm going to give you a cop-out answer of both. Because I think that on one hand, yes, it absolutely confuses what we mean by like professional burnout, especially in a profession like ours, where we're giving so much emotionally, physically, even mentally, and sitting on Zoom all day. I think there is definitely a difference there. And on the flip side, I think it's also really positive that people are talking about it. I think of things like multicultural competencies, how in the 90s, like first that came out and everybody started talking about it, and how now today that's not really like the right way to put it, and, not having a checklist and things like that. But what's great about it is that at least we're having a conversation about it, right? At least it's entering into the literature. At least it's entering into some of these professional conversations. And I feel the same way with burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, because I think that people are starting to talk about it more in the general population, even outside of the counseling field. And that seems to be a good thing. And it's also confusing because I think that the definition does vary depending on the context.
Those are like some really good points there. And, I would echo a lot of those if I were teaching classes right now. And the other side, with the question as far as teaching clients about burnout, I mean, that's a discussion that we have often in general too. And in addition to maybe the things that Gina, you had mentioned as far as looking for signs and kind of knowing yourself more and looking for your own cues and what works best for you for managing that. I also try to go in and normalize it to try to make it, to help them understand like that's a normal thing to also occur and that it's, you know, it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of incompetency. It's just that they're experiencing burnout. It's their turn. And that the way that they can handle it is going to be the skill that's used. The skill is not never experiencing burnout or vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. It'll probably happen. So how do you deal with it? And that's just fine. And when you're talking about COVID, I think it just kind of adds to it. It just makes those discussions even that much more prevalent because people had less energy to put into those regular things in their life. So once COVID hit, I think people reached that fatigue much faster and had to maybe learn skills and improve skills a lot faster than they ever were planning on. So really, though, just still normalizing it because that was the same for everyone, too. We all kind of had to jump in and do our best. And that's good.
I read this question and it's a long question. And I just made me think about, I did a lot of what we called critical incident debriefing back in the day when I was working with EAP, which meant getting staff together who've been through bank robberies or chemical plant explosions or school bus accidents and kind of addressing the issues that had occurred and how people are doing. It sounds like, and I was an ambulance chaser, I was working with the EAP, but I got really energized by this. And I think the team that I was with thought this is kind of Marty's thing. He likes chaos in a crisis. But it felt like a mental health first responder, which was kind of exciting. But it was exhausting on the back end of that. So when I talk to students about it, I talk about my experiences with vicarious trauma because there were a couple incidents I was involved in doing the debriefing with that I'm doing fine. And then something happens. Either I have an awareness of how close this was to me in terms of the age of the people who died, or I'm aware of somebody tells me some fact that I never would have imagined occurred in severe burn units. And then I'm stuck with that. And then I have to go back to work. And luckily, I worked with a really supportive group. On those occasions where they saw that happen to me, they're like, okay, we're handling tomorrow's groups. We'll go and do that work tomorrow. So I talk about it with students from a more kind of personal experience with those incidents and when they occurred. As far as COVID, I don't see much difference in how I speak about it in terms of trying to explain the concept and trying to explain the warning signs and try to explain what you need to do and getting support and supervision and all of that. COVID hasn't changed that much for me in terms of my thinking about it. And that might be sort of my being naive.
One thing that I've noticed within the COVID context is that it seems as if people aren't as hardy or resilient or able to tap into their hardiness and their resiliency in the same way as they were before, because it's been like a long-term crisis, that people's brains have been functioning. And Gina, you can probably talk to this better than I can about how people's brains have become as if they're acclimating to long-term crisis. So they're not fully at their best. They're not functioning as well as they could before. And so that's the piece to me that is kind of, kicking around in there, trying to figure out if I need some different methods, because I've seen students in their reactions and how they've been functioning through this time and how they're understanding these concepts over the last 2.5, whatever years that we've been in COVID. And it's been different than what I've seen before. So I think that's part of what brings it up. Amazingly, and this speaks to something that Marty was talking about, I had the students read a couple of weeks ago a recent article by Aponte that talks about self-awareness and self-mastery. And so it was just by chance that, because I just redesigned the practicum course, that they had read this article about kind of tapping into self and being aware of self and being able to understand self to this quote unquote mastery, which of course there's no end. Mastery is such a terrible word to use in this, because it's sort of like competence. It's like you're never going to get there. But I think that piece has been helpful as part of the conversation now to try to help to raise that self-awareness and know that it's a continual process with new things that are always going to be flying at you when you're looking for your signs and symptoms and things of that nature to point to if you're experiencing VT, CT, or burnout, and trying to understand, how do I deal with that? I think the bigger piece developmentally that I'm kind of struggling with is how to help students understand the accountability piece, because that's part of our code of ethics, right? To, help other colleagues when they are impaired and not allow them to practice, or, we can't really stop them, but trying to take steps to, when a colleague is impaired. And, I think it's difficult because it's hard to see impairment when we're in a perpetual crisis over the past 2 years. So in March is COVID again, as far as I'm concerned. So I appreciate y'all's thoughts around this one.
I appreciate the neuroscience component too. Just that constant feeling of being on edge and constantly feeling like we are responding to a crisis definitely does change the brain structure. So there is something to that. And I won't get into the details. So the next question is, speaking of burnout, does the way that you grade and evaluate depend on your mood? And if so, how do you adjust?
Yeah. So, I have had several experiences of co-teaching where I got to grade some. So I'll speak from those experiences, and I'm surprised that I don't think it does. I was really anticipating it being more of a variable, perhaps. Maybe it just being aware of the possibility of either mood or even perhaps how you feel maybe towards a student at times, or based on like previous work that the student has submitted, more so, not holding that in when you're grading a certain assignment. I think it just trying to look at it first without attaching any other name to it. And going back to the mood thing, maybe if there are times I really try to ask myself, hey, is it how you're feeling? But I don't think it does. I think for the most part, it's almost that escape. It's that place where I can go to kind of get rid of everything else and be a little bit more objective. It's more of that place for me.
I got to go with what Stephanie's saying. I say no too. And it might be because the way I've done grading, I've really ritualized it. So, exams come in generally on paper. It was different during COVID, but they come in on paper. And, there are 3 or 4 page exams with comment areas that they have to respond to questions. And I grade every student's first page, then every student's second page. And that kind of gets me a sense of what's going on with their responses. And it's really becomes very ritualized for me. Sometimes if I'm really feeling a crunch, it's like I've got to do this at the living room table because I can't do it in front of any media. If I have any media going on, it's generally bubble gum for the brain. Or it's an old movie that I've seen 100 times. So it's just kind of background issue. But the only mood I have when I'm grading is, damn it, I got to grade. It's not my favorite activity. It's tedious. Reading the same answer 20 times and evaluating it as correct is not the most exciting way to do it, but not the most exciting, entertaining thing for me, since I'm always looking for flashy new things, and that rarely occurs on an exam. Had a situation when I was growing up in high school where we had to write these long essays every year or every week for our history professor. And one student started writing garbage in it, like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck were at the, at Versailles. And he put in enough keywords that anybody glancing at it quickly would see that he had put in words that were related to the topic. But he put in a lot of garbage too, just to kind of test the instructor to see if they were grading anything. And sure enough, at the end of the semester, there was this momentous occasion where Chuck went up to the instructor and showed him his paper and said, "Now read this," because everybody hated this instructor. That has left a lasting impression in me that I read all of it, even if I've read it 20 times already. Because I don't want Chuck to slip in some Donald Duck or some Mickey Mouse in small case, so it doesn't, not proper names, but it's in there to catch me not reading exams.
That's pretty hilarious. I do read everything. And my cardinal rule is I don't grade when I'm crabby. And not just, not little crabby, but like if I'm major crabby or really in a mood, like I won't grade, I'll do something else. I might read their discussion posts and not make any comments, just to see what's going on in there. But if I'm in a mood, I put it to the side. Now it's more common. I'm in a pretty decent mood most of the time, and I don't mind grading. A lot of times I actually kind of like it because I like hearing the students' ideas and what they're up to and where they're going in their process. So I'm kind of a weirdo with grading. I kind of like it. I don't usually give written exams, so that would bore the hell out of me. No joke. But there are times where a student really puts me over the edge. And if a student's putting me over the edge, I usually put their paper down and move on to somebody else, because if they're pissing me off, I'm not in the right headspace. And there have been times where I have waited until the next day to go back to that paper. And, I don't give students, whatever course it is, I don't give the whole section their papers back until I'm done grading all of them, just because that's what I do. So I'll sometimes delay a day because I need to sit on the feedback, especially if it's hard feedback that I think might surprise a student. I want to be really sure that I'm clear and that it's not coming from a place of being irritated, frustrated, annoyed. I'm more likely to use immediacy and say, I'm frustrated that you didn't put in the work that I know you're capable of doing, as opposed to just making snarky comments everywhere throughout the paper, which is kind of where my sarcastic brain goes to begin with. So don't grade crabby is my cardinal rule.
Yeah, Jen, I'm more similar to you in this. I'm not crabby often. However, when I am, I find myself leaving the snarky comments on the side of the paper and being like, oh no, we must take a step back. This is not okay. And 95 to 99% of the grading that I do is all around like self-reflective essays and really getting to know students. So for the most part, I enjoy it too, because I love reading their narratives and I love getting to know students. So again, I read all of it too. And when I find myself leaving snarky comments on every single sentence, I'm like, all right, now it's time. I must take a step back and sit on this for a little bit, do something else. I'm hitting that burnout stage. And that's another component of grading for me that I think is really, unique to how I do it. But I like to grade everything in one sitting, which isn't always possible. And so I find that after like 19 10-page narrative essays, I start to lose my marbles and I need to take a step back. But that really kind of irritates me because I like to get them all done in one sitting so that I'm in the same frame of mind when I'm grading them all. So I have the same baseline, and that's not always possible. So finding that balance is something that's important.
So now it's a completely different kind of question, I thought, but hearing maybe some of the answers and the way things were going from the previous questions today, maybe it fits right in. All right. So how do you think you do if you were forced to play in dystopian games like Hunger Games, Squid Game, Running Man, Long Walk, etc.?
I knew this question was coming up, so I thought it was only fair that I spoke to my partner about it, because if we're caught in these games, then, Aileen and I we're slow, we're old. I'm fat and not in good health. What I want is a really good weapon, and I'm taking myself out right away. Not going to play no games. I've led a good life. I've enjoyed it. I'm the first person out of the game. By my own action. And I'm okay with that.
Well, sis, I don't know anything about any of these books, movies, TV shows. I don't even know what they are. I mean, I've heard of the Hunger Games back in the tech days. The students were reading them. They were all about them. I don't do sci-fi or fantasy. I don't even know what genre this is in. Dystopian genre. I don't know. But I'd like to think that I would be one of those prepper people, who would be able to like fashion, weapons out of pine cones and things of that nature. And that, I could make a Scud missile from a paperclip if needed. I mean, maybe, a la MacGyver situation. I don't know. So I don't really know anything about this, but I think that I could use my craftiness to be able to find my way through. I don't want to be the leader of anything. I don't want to have to, build bunkers for other people or any kind of craziness like that. Although I'm sure there's some communal aspect to all of these things. I like people, but, you only can have a few. You got to have a few people who are close to you to help, guard your perimeter. I am so outside of my comfort zone here. But I'd like to think that I would not just off myself in the first 20 minutes.
I'd like to stick around with Jenn. I think, unfortunately, I would be more in Marty's camp where I'd be one of the first to go. In Hunger Games, I would be the one eating the poisonous berries on accident, and I'd be dropping like a fly. So I don't know. I think I probably wouldn't be able to identify food. I probably wouldn't be able to fashion weapons out of pine cones. And I would probably only survive if I figured out how to hide or how to get myself lost and then do okay. Stay out of the way of all the main action. But yeah, I'm the one eating the poisonous berries.
Right. So I guess I think I'm still just kind of taken aback by Marty's answer. I guess I shouldn't be so surprised. I was just like, oh, okay, that was different, like than I was expecting real fast. But I'd like to think I'd be somewhere in the middle, depending on the game. Okay. So if it's some type of game, I was thinking about this earlier. I actually now see that there's a difference between some of these scenarios. So you have the games where you have weapons and you're actually actively trying to kill all the other participants and be the only survivor. However, then I was looking at the long walk, and that one's a little different because you're actually not allowed to interact with the other participants. For anyone who knows this story, it's been around a long, long time. It's actually a Stephen King book. So is Running Man, by the way. But it was actually when he was writing as Richard Bachman. Okay, enough of that tangent. However, in the long walk, it was just basically you have 100 people and they walk. And whoever walked the furthest, was the one who got to live. So I think I think I could deal with that. I think I'd at least get somewhere before there would be some unforeseen event that would take me out is really what I think would happen. It would be that unthinkable thing that who could have seen that coming and just her luck. So it would be just something random like that, like ricochet off of somebody else's misfortune and would take me out with them. I don't know. I just hope I never have to find out.
If it's about walking, I'm down with that. Like I'm mostly English, so we love a walk and a long walk, and you can walk for miles and days for no good reason. So if it's about walking, I'm in.
Same. I'm no killer, but I can walk.
I'm still taking myself out if it involves a walk. That's just, I'm happy. I'm content. My question, however, is you get them every year if you work in faculty positions, or you'll be getting them every year. You might have gotten them on other jobs, but, campus culture surveys, how are we doing? Let's evaluate the system. How do you respond and react to employment satisfaction surveys?
I'm trying to hold back the laughter right now at this question. So I haven't had one in my current position. And in my prior position, I think I might have gotten 2 in the time that I worked there. So for over 7 years, maybe I got 2. I didn't trust the institution. So I took it one time by rerouting my server to another country because I didn't want it to be traced. Because I really didn't trust it. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to take this and let them track it back to my address. And then the next time I was like, they don't read this shit. if they do read it, they're not using any of the information, because you would hear through the grapevine, like what people put on the surveys, and then you would see the report and it would clearly be incredibly selective. So remember one of the ones that went out, they had it at different levels, like one that went to students, one that went to faculty, one that went to staff, blah, blah, blah. And they said, they used the phrase, I think it was the climate, the university climate were the words. And that there were people talking about the weather mostly in their responses. And I just couldn't believe this. I mean, of course, at the student level, you'd think like, okay, so undergrads, they may not really understand what that means, and it wasn't defined. But was that seriously coming back on faculty and staff? I don't really remember the details. All I remember was, people were talking about the weather? Because in that part of the world, in the Midwest, like, what is there to say? It's really cold in the winter. Yeah. And it's really hot in the summer. I think we're done here. So yeah, not a fan of the survey, because it only matters if they do something with it. And when you learn they ain't doing nothing, you might as well keep your mouth shut.
So I have yet to see one of these. And if I have seen one of these, I have not paid any attention to it whatsoever. And so I'm guessing that's probably more of what's happening here, is that I see the title of it and I'm like, nope, delete. Because I don't know. I think I agree with what Jenn was saying too, in that I don't know if people read it. I don't know if much can be done about the terrible weather in the Midwest. However, that being said, I think each employee has something different. They have different needs and stuff like that. So I can't expect my employer to listen to mine individually and solely. So I don't put a lot of stock in these, and yeah, I probably delete them.
When you asked how we would fill these out, I thought as quickly as possible. Unless there was something actually, and again, doesn't necessarily apply to me in the spirit of these questions, but I think I feel this similarly to Jenn and Gina on this. Just, there's other things I have to get done today. Yeah, that's it.
I think I'm going to start filling them out like Chuck wrote history papers. I seriously, Jenn's trickery about the VPN. Wow. I wish I would have thought of that, because I didn't do that. And we had a previous Elliot brought a question. We'll bring it again in another show. What's your favorite saying? And my favorite saying is, if you're going to speak the truth, you better have a horse by the door, which means you better be ready to go, because people are not going to like what you have to say. Fact of the matter is, for me, following my dystopian society answer, I'd probably take myself out first. As you get more and more of these, and I've had them through associations I've been in, I've had them through universities I've worked at, I've had it in agencies I've worked at. You begin to see the realization that the data, if they're using it at all, which generally they don't, doesn't impact any sincere changes within the organization. Typically, what we hear are the wonderful things about an organization, but not the things that are going to change or need to change. So for me, it's just another lesson in learned helplessness. The more you do it, and the more you don't get any impact or any change. So how do I respond to them? I've been responding more honestly, just to see if I can move the needle, because I'm tired of responding honestly and cautiously, and then the final report comes out and they share it with the university, or they share it with the business, or they share it with the association, and all you hear about is how happy people are here. And I'm like, I don't know who you're talking to. So that's my take on employment. It had a couple of those come my way in the last couple of weeks, which is what's brought this question to head for me. And it's been a really tough couple of years, which makes it even harder to respond to these in a happy clappy sort of way. So that's it, I think. That's all the questions we have for tonight. However, we have a final shot question. And I'm going to tell you, this final shot question came up for me today because yesterday I went to my daughter, whose birthday was today. She's a teacher at the Aurora School of Music, and they had a rock concert. And so you have these kids who are 7.5 to 16 playing drums and guitar and everything like that. And it was, oh boy. I'm having the F word is, and by that I mean fun, is kind of having a hard time getting through my lips. But things like listening to Sweet Emotion, Yellow, All Star, Dust in the Wind, Nutbush City Limits, Day Tripper, Dude by Lake Street Dive, and it wasn't like it was banned, so it was. He's going to play bass on Lake Street Dive. And you just don't get the whole sense of, anyway, that was the last recital I went to. So I thought I'd ask this question and see, out of curiosity, what was the last recital you went to? And it might've been one you were in.
When we think recital, are we thinking kids?
I didn't ask that.
I don't know. I mean, when I think recital, I think kids. Sorry, I'm dipping in the mind here. I'm sure that I went to one of my friends' kids something in the past decade. But the last, I remember I had a colleague who sang in a choir, and I went to their Christmas. I don't know what it was, some kind of Christmas pageant. That's the best I got. That was like 3 years ago. I don't know. I guess it was 4 years ago. It was pre-COVID. Lord help me. I have no idea. Why don't I just say I don't know and keep it moving?
So mine was probably the last formal one that I attended was probably my own 20 some years ago. And the informal ones was probably this afternoon. My daughter is 3 and just got tap shoes. So we are living a whole new life of recitals every day, every 5 minutes on the minute. So that is very special and something that's great for productivity.
Wonderful that you get a private performance, all the time, front row seat, Oh man, people are going to be so jealous. I'm also going to say that it was one of mine, a piano recital, and I think I won a bust of Chopin.
You won a bust of Chopin?
I did.
At a piano recital?
At a piano recital.
Do you still have those piano skills?
My piano skills are at the same level they were when I won that bust of Chopin.
Well, thanks to the squad, Jen, Gina, and Stephanie. And look for some of these characters on their podcast on thepodtalk.net. You can find out more about them at circularfiringsquad.net. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.